You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And you've done your research on the website. You've talked to somebody who works there. You know what the struggles are and how you might be able to help solve them. If you're able to construct a narrative around things that really matter, the things that you can really bring to the table and the value that you can add to their firm, and you can say that in an eloquent way, I think that those are the types of things that everybody would be impressed with and walk away from an interview feeling like, man, as long as you fit with the culture and the people in that firm, you have a really good shot at getting that position.
Welcome to the Archispeak podcast, the podcast for architects by architects, where we discuss all things about architecture. I'm Neil Pan. Each episode, Evan Troxel, Cormac Phelan, and me invite you in on the conversation as we talk about everything in the profession, both the good and the bad. Maybe you're considering a career in architecture, you're still in school, or you've been around the block more times than you'd like to admit. Join us in the studio as we gather around the water cooler and talk about this profession we call architecture. It's time for some Archispeak. Welcome to episode 38 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And to start this week off, I think, Evan, we have a friend of the show to announce.
Yeah, this week we've got Marika McKeel, who donated $37, a repeat friend of the show, and $37 because episode 37, she was on it, and she just said that it was so much fun, and multiple people have told her that it was the reason they want to be more involved with the AIA and or attend the convention next year. So that's really great to hear. We had a lot of fun with that episode too. We got a lot of great feedback. It sounds like, you know, the energy is still continuing even after the convention, which is a great sign that people are excited about where things are headed. And we're happy that we could talk to all those fine people who we talked to last week. So thanks, Marika. We really appreciate your donation to the podcast. And thanks for, again, being a friend of the show. And if anybody else wants to be a friend of the show, if you go to archispeakpodcast.com/donate, you can donate anything over $5 and you can become a friend of the show and get your name read on the show if you'd like. And we appreciate every donation. It really does help us continue with the podcast. And another thing that we should mention is that we have a new, I guess you could kind of call it a sponsor, but we have on the website, if you go to archispeakpodcast.com, and this is for all of you students out there or unlicensed professionals working in architecture. A friend of ours, David Doucette, has a great company called the Architect Exam Prep. And if you go to our website, you can actually support the podcast by using the link at archispeakpodcast.com/ARE. If you go to that page and use the link to go to his site, we get a percentage of every sale that he makes, and he does make some really great study materials. You can read testimonials and read all about them over on his site. But I've heard great things about them, and I've talked to David personally. I've been on his podcast as well. So he's a stand-up guy, so we recommend his stuff, and we really appreciate his support of our podcast through this little setup that he invited us to participate in. So everybody go check out archispeakpodcast.com/ARE, and if you end up picking up one of his study guides through there, we get a little bit of that back. So thanks, David.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Oh, and I can't not say that Neil Pan donated $5 to the show this last week. Oh. And actually he asked
Who
to
is
be
that guy?
announced
he sounds
as
like a cool dude.
Yeah, Old Man Pan.
No, he sounds like a cool dude.
Wait, I thought he asked for his money back.
He did. I want to refund.
Okay, so since you guys opened that can of worms, let's talk about why that happened.
He was the first friend of the show to ask for a refund.
Oh, he's about to out somebody here.
No, I'm not going to out. I won't out her. I'll take the hit here. So yes, I did donate $5 to the show, but it was in to all in fun to try and test out the system.
Yeah, and actually, just to say it on the show, we did find a bug in the donation system, and so if people have tried to donate before but couldn't for some reason, it should all be fixed now. So we got it fixed throughout the whole system. Everybody with a Squarespace account can thank us later.
Neil's money.
And it only cost us $5 of my money.
Well, you donate $5, you get your name read on the show. So
That's
thanks,
true.
Neil.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? You're welcome. Hey, we should also mention our Archispeak show line, our hotline, helpline, if in need be, at 415-484-8496. And Jess Stafford called in, showing us or talking about the big time small firm group over on Google Plus, and how useful that is, and how people are using that to kind of share information. And it's a really great resource for everyone, and we recommend people go check that out too. And thanks, Jess, for calling in.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, we mentioned on last week's show, or I guess Mark LePage actually is the one who brought it up, was the Foresight report that was published by the AIA. And in that report, it mentioned our podcast, and it mentioned a bunch of friends of the show who we talked to on that show. So it mentioned Mark LePage, it mentioned Enoch Sears, quite a few people, Jess Stafford, big time small firm. And I think one of the things that Jess brought up in his voicemail was that everybody should read that Foresight report. It's a PDF. It's available on the AIA's website. But the cool thing is it really gives you an idea of what is going on in not only the AIA-centric stuff, but just in the industry in general. And it's very well done. I really have to give them some kudos there, because the report not only looks good, it's got great content. Obviously, it mentions some really cool people worth checking out. And I think what Jess was also bringing up was that they mentioned that people at Big Time Small Firm, which is Jess's Google Plus community, are conversing about the profession. But even more than that, people are posting portfolios and getting feedback, and they're talking about issues that they're dealing with, how to work with clients of particular types, and there's a lot of great advice being traded. And there's people doing virtual studio work over Google Plus through the Hangout that they met there. So it's really become a great resource for, just like the name says, big time small firms. There's a lot of small firm architects on there who are getting stuff done through learning new things about business, but also working with each other, and it's pretty cool. So thanks, Jess, for calling in, and mentioning that is definitely worth bringing up here for our audience, because everybody's invited. Just go to Google Plus and look up Big Time Small Firm. And I think we can have a link to that in the show notes, right? So where do people find the show notes, Neil?
They can get them in their email address, actually. Every week, they can be emailed to you. Just go to just about any page at archispeakpodcast.com, and on the right-hand side, you can get the show. You can sign up to have the show notes emailed to you. So this week, well, I had an interesting little experience. I actually went on a job interview, and won't probably go too much into that, but I wanted to use that as kind of a springboard to talk about, different things about what one maybe should present, and I want to get your guys' opinions working in larger firms, what you have seen people bring in, or what you might recommend that they bring in to kind of show their work. And then also too, I want to touch on, because there's a funny story that we'll probably get to eventually, is about, maybe what to wear, because I think that may be a little different today than it might have been from in years past. And then also too, I want to touch on some things to ask, some things you should do to prepare before you go in, not just, to show your work, but really kind of to investigate the firm that you're going to go talk to, and some questions and some possible responses. A number of years ago, I was coached by a recruiter for a job and got some great advice from him. And so I want to share that later on when we
Awesome.
get to that part as well. So I want to start off by, just talking about actually, I'm going to ask you guys first to kind of talk about what you have seen others maybe coming into your firms to do as an interview, or if you've interviewed people, what do you look for in their quote unquote portfolio?
I've been a part of when we, start getting resumes in, looking through the stack to see who we'd potential interviews we'd like to set up. And so really I want to start with resumes, because your interview actually starts with your resume. Let me repeat that. Your interview starts with your resume. What I mean by that is that you're not going to get your phone call for that interview if your resume doesn't stand out, if it's poorly written, if you have typos. And oh my Lord, have I seen so many typos. Spell check.
I can see those typos before they come.
Yes, you will not believe how quickly and how easily it is to spot a typo in your resume, and it's amazing that nowadays with the little red squiggly line that shows up underneath your misspelled word, how often that goes ignored, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the opportunity to have your own Evan Troxel reviewing your
show notes,
I could start charging for that.
You could.
Yeah, send them to me. I think sometimes students coming out of school maybe aren't using Microsoft Word with a squiggly red line. Maybe they're using Adobe InDesign or Illustrator to lay out their portfolio, or not their portfolio, but using their resume in more of a graphic manner. You guys,
all of that has
spell check is in there. You have to look for it though.
Well, I think we should also bring up that, spell check can still get. You can still use the wrong word spelled correctly. Mistakes happen. We're all human, and if you're a bad speller like me, they happen quite often. And so I think the most important thing when you're talking about that is have someone else look at it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, really, this what this comes down to though is this is a detail oriented profession.
Yeah,
and this is the very first step to see if you're capable of checking your work and making sure it's done correctly.
Because 9 times out of 10, if you're like our firm, you're not going to get an interview. I mean, unless there's something else in your resume that just stands out there, like, let's overlook the fact that he misspelled his name. Let's get him in.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're still, that'll immediately disqualify you, because that's kind of, you just hit the nail on the head. We are a detail-oriented profession. We
are liable for mistakes.
We check and cross-check and do all of this thing. And if your first and only document, or your first
impression
that you're presenting is filled with errors and mistakes, that really doesn't say much about, your ability to check and detail and, do all of these other things, and it may sound very trivial, but it really isn't.
Well, this goes against friend of the show, Steve Hall's comment that he made back when we were talking about a similar subject earlier on in one of our earlier podcasts. And he said that a friend of his or somebody had told him that they would never hire an architect with perfect spelling because they're not creative.
Well, when it comes to the resume, Cormac, oftentimes, it sometimes depends too a little bit on what the firm's looking for. If the firm's looking for somebody with some experience, in a particular, so in other words, you may be coming right out of college and you may have the most spectacular resume, but if the firm's not looking for that level of person, then, it won't make any difference. And so I guess what I'm just saying that depending on the job that the firm is looking for will have a lot to do whether you get that call. Now, that being said, if they're looking for an entry-level person, say coming right out of college or having just graduated college, then you do have to make sure, always everything has to be spelled correctly and such. But doing that, or having that resume that stands out, oftentimes is, what's on that resume, and how does, what suggestions could we give to students out there that would help their resume stand out beyond just, everybody seems to be a graphics pro today, and, graphically your resume is probably going to look really good. But I think one suggestion I would make is make it readable.
Well, yeah. And I'm actually glad you asked that, because you say, everybody's a graphic genius and this, that, the other. We all would like to think that of ourselves, that, oh man, I went to architecture school, I can do graphics like nobody's business. Guess what? That usually means that those are the people who are going to overdo the graphics on their resume, not their portfolio, their resume.
Yeah,
they're going to just
simplify,
clean and simple, readable. If you want to maybe arrange the columns or whatever, or do something that makes it stand out, but is still very crisp, clean, and simple, then please do that.
Well, then, Cormac, what are you looking for when you look through these stacks of resumes?
Well,
what information are you looking for that's going to make one stand out above the other, beyond just the graphic look of it? If we want it to be clean and readable, what should that text say? What does it need to present?
Can I butt in here?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, the outline of a traditional resume, I think, does not apply.
No.
We should not have an objective on our resumes.
Oh, absolutely. Because we all know what our objective is.
Yeah.
We're all going for the same job, architecture.
We should not have a list of every job you've ever had. It should be relevant experience. You should list references if they're asked for. You shouldn't say references upon request. No kidding, right?
Yeah.
We know that. And then I like to see something that shows that you can think. So maybe there's a sketch on your resume, or maybe there's little graphs that show how good you are in 5 different programs, because, honestly, people are looking for how good you are in certain pieces of software.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So maybe instead of saying, I am an expert in Autodesk Revit and Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator and Adobe InDesign, and yeah, we know who makes all the programs. You don't have to put the little trademark symbols after each one.
Exactly.
But it would be nice to see something different, right? And so something that I've seen recently is somebody did little kind of neat looking pie charts of what level they felt they were in each program. And they're not an expert in everything. Nobody is an expert. I claim to know a medium amount of many different programs. I might be considered an expert compared to somebody else, but I'm not an expert. I don't know it all. So I think something that shows that you're thinking of ways to present your skills in a different way can help you stand out. And then, again, like what Cormac was saying, simple color, maybe there's a little color on it. Maybe there's something that makes the whole thing more readable when it comes to the layout. And that's it. It's a first impression. It's not going to get a thorough comb over to see exactly what's going on in there, but it might be the thing that actually gets you a phone call.
Right. Oh, and I don't know if you guys agree with me or not on this, but sweet Jesus, please don't put that you were a fry cook at McDonald's when you were in high school. You're going relevant for an architecture job.
Yeah,
exactly.
And if you don't have any, it's okay to not have any. It depends on what level you're at, and so just it needs to be appropriate for the job.
Fair enough.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So you get that call. Now, I'm going to preface this a little bit. When I was at Cal Poly, I went away for my 5th year and spent that year over in Italy.
Did some hard time.
did some hard time in Italy, Florence, Italy. It was tough.
That sounds like
it was
a
hard.
rough place. Yeah.
Somebody had to take that bullet. So anyway, traditionally in that last year, you're working on not only your project, but you're building a portfolio to go out and start interviewing on jobs, before you graduate. And so hopefully if you don't already have a firm that you interned at before, that you can go and, kind of show them your work. Well, in my case, because I was overseas for that whole year, I never did that. And I had worked for for other firms for a number of years before I even finished college, for several years before I went to college and during college and after, and just after. So, ironically enough, I never took the time to sit down and put together a quote unquote portfolio in a book, in kind of a book format, because every time I went for a job, it was always, I could show, say a set of drawings. Here's a set of construction drawings I did. And going back to what you guys were saying, making your experience or your relevant information. I was going for a job to help do construction drawings, basically in firms. So that's what I showed them. Hey, I can come in here and I can be productive. Hey, that's what they wanted to see. So I've never had any sort of nice, fancy sort of quote unquote portfolio. So, what I did for this interview was to kind of think about like, okay, well, what are they looking for? In my case, they were looking for a project architect who can, take a drawing from design all the way through construction drawings, and do the whole package. And so what I brought them was essentially that. I showed them some of my own projects that I had done. I showed them, preliminary sketches and design options that I had presented my clients and that I had done by hand, and also, then said, okay, well, here's these different examples, and then that became this set of construction drawings, and then I pulled out my iPad and showed them actual photos of the projects completed, and I kind of did that for 2 or 3 projects. Kind of showing them slight variations on a theme, but basically that I could take a project, design it, get the construction drawings, get the permit, and here's the photos at the end. And so that's kind of what I did. I don't know what do we suggest other people do, or did I do something completely wrong here?
Well,
yes.
Let me ask.
Okay, great.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, real quick, I'm confused about something. You said that when you were coming out of Cal Poly and you were showing all of this stuff, you pulled out your iPad?
No. I'm sorry if I misunderstood.
Was that made of stone?
No, I was using my Newton back then, but something else I got to put in the show notes now. For those that don't remember. Anyway, that when I came out of college, I brought construction drawings basically that I had done for other firms and said, look, here's what I can do. I wasn't trying to show them pretty design photos or design projects that I did in school, because they weren't looking for that. They were looking for, hey, can you come in here and get some construction drawings done for us? Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say before, because I want to hear, because you had asked the question, did you do something wrong? And
right,
Evan answered yes, and I want to hear what he had to say.
No, I was messing around.
He's just messing with me like normal.
But, there's...
But I am curious, though. I mean,
well,
what do you expect to see people come into an interview and present their work? I mean...
There's 2 different types of interviews or interviewees. And so we got to kind of preface how we respond to this in 2 different ways.
Okay.
There's the fresh out of college to maybe 2-3 year experience interviewee. Actually, there's the fresh out of college one. So that they're really not going to be bringing you anything unless they've worked for a firm for a little bit and, they just kind of show a little bit of work experience. Otherwise, they're going to really be coming with nothing but their schoolwork.
Right.
And it's okay, and we can have a conversation about how to present the schoolwork. And then there's the, we're hiring somebody with experience, and what does that person bring? Because they're two completely different interviewees, and you're looking for two completely different things from them.
All right, well, let's start with the college student. What do you look for if you're looking for, a college student who may not have worked for a firm, or maybe they did intern a summer or two, but they're mainly just have their college work to show. What do we recommend how do they do that? I mean, do they just go all iPad and just show animations and everything, or do we print something out and put it in a book, or what?
I like the printed book version.
Okay.
And the reason why I like it, and people may think that it's old school, now that we're getting into
you
the
are old,
age.
so
But the reason why is because first of all, we will be generating print copy to present to clients, to present to potential clients, future clients, past clients, present to, award boards and all this other stuff. I mean, we, as digitally oriented as the architecture profession is now, we use a lot of paper.
Yeah.
And I like to see a paper portfolio because I'd like to see how they can arrange it, how they can put it together, how they can clarify their thoughts on paper, because that's going to tell you a lot on how they can clarify, convey their thoughts for work that you're going to ask them to do from the start all the way through. Because you're coming out of college, some of the programs the most, Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator and all this other stuff, and those tools can really help you get your thought across and have it clean and crisp and clarified and all this other stuff. And for me, what's the big turnoff is when you're coming out of school and what you try to do is basically fit everything that you have done into that portfolio. And so if you did a quick scribble, or you did this or you did that, and you just try to throw everything and the kitchen sink into your portfolio without a real coherent thought, you're just trying to show stuff. It's all about the presentation and layout.
Well, and I think you want, I don't know if it matters what age you are or what level you are, you want to be able to kind of construct a narrative that can take somebody through a process, and the graphics should support the narrative, but the narrative should not be about the graphics.
Correct.
Or the drawings even. I mean, you kind of want the pieces to the puzzle, and you have to figure out what that puzzle is. And again, I don't know that it matters what level you are. You want to go, and you alluded to this earlier, Neil, you want to go in there with a plan. And this is, I was talking earlier with my wife about what we were going to be talking about tonight. And she had all kinds of ideas of things we could talk about. But I think the one that really came across was that you go in, it's kind of like buying a car, right? If you show up to the dealer and you don't know what you're doing, right, and you're set on buying a car, you're gonna get reamed by the car salesman, right? But if you go in there with a bunch of research that you've done ahead of time, you know how much the car costs the dealer, you know what the destination charge is, you know how much you can pay, you know what your down payment is, and you've done all that research, you're probably going to walk away with a pretty good deal on a car. They can't pull the wool over everybody's eyes. You get to do the same thing when you're going and looking for a job. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And you've done your research on the website. You've talked to somebody who works there. You know what the struggles are and how you might be able to help solve them, depending on the level, again, that you're going in for. And I think if you're able to construct a narrative around things that really matter, the things that you can really bring to the table, and the value that you can add to their firm, and you can say that in an eloquent way, I think that those are the types of things that everybody would be impressed with and walk away from an interview feeling like, man, as long as you fit with the culture and the people in that firm, you have a really good shot at getting that position.
Right. Now, what's funny is that we were sort of doing the same thing. with my wife too, and we were talking about things, and I started thinking about questions that are typical questions that we ask in an interview. And if you think about kind of like those standard typical questions that you would be asked, that's kind of how you prepare. It's, what, if you've been on an interview or if you've practiced, like say at at one of these job fairs or something that hopefully every school does, for all of their, because we used to do job interviews, or we used to do mock interviews. We used to do job fairs where
you can give people feedback on portfolios and
exactly
all kinds of stuff.
So you're going to know kind of the very standard questions that are going to be asked you, and that's how you can kind of frame your presentation to your potential employer.
Well, I think the important thing there is to know what sort of job you're going for at any particular firm. And if you're just coming out of college, you're setting it. You know what type of job you want, and hopefully the firm that you're interviewing with has that job. Otherwise, you probably shouldn't be interviewing there.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think
exactly.
I think you need to take, and it's almost like customizing your portfolio.
Absolutely.
For every single interview, because you want the documents and or the drawings or examples or photos that you're going to show them during the interview to create that narrative to answer their questions. And that question at the end of the day really boils down to, how can you help the firm be productive and make money? Right?
I'm actually glad you said that, because the way that we as, architects go after jobs, when we're interviewing for jobs with potential clients, say it's a school board, or say it's, a large-scale residential client and stuff, we always taper our presentation to them on relevant work to them.
Sure, absolutely.
And it works the same way when you're interviewing with them. You've got to know about the firm. You got to know who you're interviewing with. So you got to do a little bit of research to find out, well, what does this firm do? I'm going to go work for Neil Pan Architects. Well, what does Neil Pan Architects do? Let's figure that out first. Let's try to know a little bit about the people you're going to, interview with, because
know what market segments they work in. Yeah, you have to know all that kind of stuff. And I also think that at the end of the interview, something that is maybe obvious, maybe not. I'm assuming you're going to be interviewing there because you want the job, but you should ask for the job. You should have the excitement and go in there and say, I am really excited about the possibility of working here. And don't walk out without saying that. And it goes the same with what you were saying, Cormac. When you're interviewing with clients, you also need to ask for the job.
Well, then there's so when you're fresh out of school, you're interviewing because you want a job, you want experience. So what you really should be asking for in kind of framing questions, because you should go in with a set of questions as well, because they're going to ask you tons of questions, but they're going to also expect you to, because there's always that famous, so do you have any questions for me? And people are like,
I've got few. We'll get there.
But
that's right. Neil's had some coaching here.
But what you should do when you're fresh out of school, and Neil, maybe this is a good time for you to punch in on that, but you should go in there because you're not only just looking for a job, but you're also looking for somebody who's going to mentor you, somebody's going to, help you start framing your future career. And so you should interview them on, how are you going to help me become, the architect of the future that you're wanting me to be? How are you going to help me, progress my career, as much as how I'm going to help you become a better firm by me being there, kind of thing.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I think that's you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and you really should go in with that sort of enthusiasm. I don't want to say attitude. Don't go in with that sort of attitude, but go in with that sort of enthusiasm that you really want to work there, and you really want to know what are the things that they do that are going to help you as well. So, but let's. I'm going to ask another question here about what do you wear to an interview today? Because
pants.
I went into this interview pants. Yes, definitely wear pants. Even on no pants day, wear pants.
Closed-toed shoes, no flip-flops.
And no flip-flops. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think to a certain extent, things are a little more casual. Maybe. I don't know. I wore a dress shirt, and a coat. I didn't wear a tie. And one of the first comments the gentleman said to me was, "Oh, you're overdressed." My only response to that was, "Well, I didn't wear a tie, but I thought that was kind of an odd comment, but okay, I thought I'd at least
it depends.
Look professional,
It depends on the firm. You're not going to walk into SOM and not be in a suit and tie.
Okay, fair enough. Well, this definitely wasn't SOM, so. But I mean, so how do you tailor that?
Well, when I moved to DC and I was interviewing, it was totally uncharacteristic of me, but I wore a suit to every interview that I went to. I was overdressed for some, and they looked at me, of course, like, "Ooh, look, we're hiring an undertaker." You can't unless
Man, I'd pay good money for those photos.
Yeah, no.
Denim button-up shirt. Yeah.
Don't give them any ideas.
Yeah, no. It's really hard unless you really know the firm. It's really hard to.
It's better to be overdressed than underdressed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You may, and we always get the same thing with, we hire them and they come in for like the first week and they're all, well dressed and, they're wearing a tie and everything else. And then they start realizing,
the culture's different. Yeah.
Right. So then they get used to, kind of how it is, but you can never honestly be overdressed. And it may, there may be people out there, "Oh, that's crap," I mean, hell, I went into, I don't know if you ever heard of the firm Skaga Milam and Bray. They're a firm out of Atlanta. And when we were in school, we had went and toured their office. Now, if we hadn't toured their office and I was going in for a job interview, I would have walked in there in probably a suit and tie or, business casual with a sport coat or something like that. But when we met Max Gawkin, he comes out and he's wearing blue jeans with holes in the knees. He was wearing a pair of Converse that you could see his toe hanging out and a black T-shirt. And now you're like, okay, I'm going to dress, eventually you will be dressing, comfortably like that. But you're really not going to go into a job interview for somebody and dress like that.
No.
Even though that's the environment, you're still going to dress professionally.
Yeah.
Because this is a professional job you're going after.
This has been a very male-sided conversation so far, so we apologize.
Yes, we apologize to our female audience out there.
Well, Neil did wear.
Well, Cormac's not going to be wearing a dress to an interview, so.
But Neil did wear a skirt because it was no pants day, so he,
it's a kilt.
Well, that's what he tried to call it.
Well,
but,
I think
it was flowery.
I think I dressed professionally. I knew enough about the firm to know that, probably a tie would have been overkill. So I basically took your advice, Cormac. I dressed professionally, business casual with a coat. And I thought that was appropriate.
I think you should be, if you're the kind of person who loves to wear, fancy clothes, for lack of a better term, if you like to wear a suit and tie, then that's what you should wear.
Absolutely.
You want to be comfortable and confident. That's not to say that you should wear jeans and a t-shirt if that's what you're comfortable in. But I mean, if you should, to some extent, be representing who you actually are. But just a quick story. My friend Mark, who I work with, he had a great story about because when he goes to construction meetings, he always wears a suit and a bow tie, and he wears that quite often to work. And
into the field.
Into the field. Yep. And I know a lot of guys who go to the field and they'll wear their boots and they'll wear
Well, I was in the field today and I was wearing
anything.
jeans and a button-down long-sleeve shirt that is rolled up.
So maybe real quick, why did you wear that?
One, because I know that I'm going to be walking around the site, and there's a lot of, it's rain, it's muddy, it's, I'm going to be...
You are on the East Coast, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's I had rain come through yesterday. The site was muddy. The week before, the site was, extremely dusty and stuff.
There's no rain out here.
We are required. we are required to wear work boots out on site.
Okay. I think that can still be accomplished with a suit, but yeah. So here's why he wore that. And because he was asked by the principal of the firm when they went out together, why do you, don't you want to kind of talk the talk and fit in and be one of the guys when you're out there? And he said, absolutely not. When I show up to a job site, I want everybody to know that I am in charge.
Nice.
And that is, it was how it worked. It worked very well. And so I think it really depends on who you are. And it depends on the image that you want to put out there too. But I thought that was an interesting take on it.
And then let me throw one further. So that's how I dressed today when I went to the job site. Now, yesterday when I went to the job site, pretty much wore the same thing and yesterday was a good reason why I dressed the way I do, because yesterday we were, touring the site. We were doing our walkthroughs and everything. And we were trying to talk about how to, arrange furniture in the media center. And it was all wrong. And so what did we do? Started changing it right then and there. I got down and I started doing the work. And I was the one moving all the furniture around. I was the one putting things in place. And basically the movers, the guys that were installing all the furniture, they just sat back and, if I needed to move something heavy, they helped me out. But I mean, it was, I always dress to be prepared to get in there and do whatever it takes to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, yes, as architects, we're basically out there with our little roll of drawings and,
You make it sound so cute.
But... we're there to, just answer questions and then kind of go out. I can't ask anybody to do a job that I wouldn't be willing to try to do myself, regardless of if it's, hey, come weld this thing. Thankfully I know how to weld, but, it's, that's just the way I am. It's just, I've always had the more blue collar architect approach to, how I go out into the field.
Yeah.
In fact, I love going out into the field.
I think we got severely off topic there, Neil.
We did.
No, I think it's very appropriate to talk about what to wear, not only, once you have the job and if you're on site, but also what to wear. I think, what to wear to that interview. And I think we nailed it. We probably didn't give any good examples for what our female listeners should wear because we don't really have any experience with that. But I think I think basically you need to dress professionally and dress appropriately for the job you're going for. In my case, a tie would have been probably overkill, and I wasn't comfortable wearing a tie, so I didn't want to go there, but I felt it was appropriate, and for the position that and who I am, a sport coat would be appropriate for that. And, I think if I'd gone in a suit and tie, it would have been overdressed. Would that have been wrong? No, probably not. Because like we say, I don't think you can be overdressed, but I didn't think it would have been appropriate. So I went with my gut, and, pretty much I was right. Other than if I'd probably gone in jeans and a shirt, probably would have been okay too. But look, that's not the message I wanted to send.
There's the old adage of dress for the job you want, not for the job you have. And honestly, if you don't have a job and you're going for a job interview, you dress for the job you want, which, is the boss's job. But I mean, I always look at it this way. At least I can prove to them that if we ever have to go on some event where we do have to dress up, I at least own one suit.
Yep.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about what you should ask them. I mean, you're going to be asked a lot of questions, and hopefully you've had that experience through going through the job fairs or through interviews. I mean, part of the reason I took this job or took this interview, I wasn't sure I was going to have much of a shot at it anyway, and so I don't really expect it to hear much about this or any further on it, but I wanted to go just because it's been a long time since I've been on my own for 5 years. So I was just kind of curious, what are people looking for? What are people offering? And just kind of go through that experience. And so since I hadn't done this in quite a number of years, I really had to spend, I probably spent a good 4 hours the night before just going through and creating that narrative that you spoke of, Evan. And how do I show the work that I have done in a narrative that would answer the questions that they would have, basically, can Neil do the job that they were looking for? Mm-hmm. Because in the email correspondence prior to the interview, I asked them, what are you looking for? What position are you trying to hire? In this case, they had contacted me up front and asked if I would be interested in interviewing for a job there. And so in this case, I responded back, yes, I'd be interested. And what exactly are you looking for? So I had a rough idea, going in. And so, that helped me generate that narrative and try and put together a quote unquote portfolio that would support that narrative. So, but I also think that you need to go in there, with some questions yourself and interview them. And I think one of the good questions that I was coached with, and this, was for a different job a number of years ago, but one of the questions that I was coached to ask was, asking them to describe the position you were looking to fill here. Now, I had already done that basically through the email prior, so I had a good idea. But if you're going in, you've sent a resume in to a firm and they call you in, and if you don't have that opportunity before, that's a good question to start off with. Find out what they're looking for. And then even, that should be a question to ask very early, because then you have the opportunity to go through your portfolio in the interview and maybe skip over some things that are not necessarily relevant to that narrative and point and highlight the things that are.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that allows you to keep it as brief as possible. I mean, everybody's time there is valuable, and you should show respect for that. I also think it's a good idea to go in there with kind of this is something that my wife and I talked about also, is going in there with a plan of what are you going to do your first day? What are you going to do your first week? What are you going to do there your first month? What are ways that you're going to figure out how you can do your job the best? I think that something you definitely want to show when you're in there is your initiative and your motivation to bring value to that company, like Neil said, to make money for them. I mean, that's really, it's going to be more on you than you probably think to figure out what to do and be self-directed those early stages of your employment, because a lot of times, you're walking in and you're going to ask somebody, okay, what do I do next? And then you're going to finish that task, and then you're going to walk up and say, okay, I'm done. And they're super busy people who are working there. And it's like, the last thing that I want to do with somebody who's a new hire is hold their hand for every single task that comes along. And so that's some extra advice that I could give.
Along those lines, one of the other things you should do before you go in, and I know we've mentioned do your research, but if they've done, buildings or projects in your area, go out and visit them. Make some mental notes about, say, a specific detail or something about that project that impressed you, that you liked, and bring that up during the interview. Say, as I was preparing to come in here, I went out and saw such and such building. I really, liked or found it interesting how you addressed this particular problem or this design challenge, and then ask them how they did that. That shows them that you're interested not only in just having a job there, but in how they think, how they solve problems, what's their philosophy for approaching a project, or how they deal with issues that come up. So I think that's something, if you have that opportunity, is really good to do up front.
And it also helps to show that potential employer that you care enough to actually, do a little research on them and find, because they're not really going to do as much research on you as you are of them.
Although that is much easier these days.
But
and they might not even read your resume before you sit down to talk to them.
But they might have read your Facebook.
Right. Neil Pan is enjoying a pants-free day.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But, another question to ask, in addition to, asking if they could describe the position they're looking to fill. But I think another question that I was coached about was asking them to describe the person that would fill that job. It's an interesting question to ask them because it kind of throws it back in their court a little bit, like, well, who is it that you're looking for? Not only describing the position, but what's that person like? Who is that person? And that gets them thinking a little bit. It might actually give you, a few minutes to think about how to respond to their next question. But I think that's a very interesting question to ask them because it gets them. They might not even have thought about that. And so now they're going to have to think about it. And you're the one that's causing them to think about it. It shows that you're thinking, that you can think for yourself and that you're prompting them for information.
Well, there's three different things, right? There's the type of person they're looking for, then there's the job description, and then there's the actual tasks that you're going to be doing should you get the job. And a lot of times those aren't all figured out ahead of time. Usually we know what types of tasks you're going to be doing a lot more so than what the job posting is looking for. A lot of job postings are pretty generic. We're looking for enthusiastic people who are, problem solvers and, it's
self-starters.
Yeah.
Self-motivated.
So I think good questions to ask are things like, what do you see me doing on a daily basis? What do you see me doing on a weekly basis? What would my chances be to move up? How could I take on more responsibility? What could I show you very quickly so that I can move up to the next level? I mean, as people working in this field, really the key to growth is continually taking on more responsibility. So it's going to be up to you to figure out how you can do that, but you can get hints on what are going to be quick ways for you to do that specific to them.
Now, just as a side note, real quick.
Yeah.
Because when you do get that job, and I think, Evan, you were saying is that, a lot of times firms, they hire new people, but they're not, when they're put on a project team, that project team's not necessarily ready to go ahead and stop, show you exactly what you need to do, and then keep on keeping on. They have to get you integrated into the flow of what's already happening. And the best way for you to do that is to just get in there, roll up your sleeves, and get working. ask them, hey, would it be okay if I print out a set of the documents and just kind of flip through it and maybe figure out where I'm, can best help you out? Do things like that. Be very self-motivated. Don't always wait to ask for the next thing to do, because, me as a project manager, when I'm, and I've had new hires recently working with me that have kind of frustrated me because I don't have time to stop and keep saying, okay, you got to do this, or let me do these red lines for you, but I've got to do this, and this first. And then they're just kind of sitting there waiting for me to kind of do some work. If you don't have time to actually get, like for me, if I don't have time to give you work, try to find work. Try to create work. Try to, say, look, I don't want to be a bother, but I really want to try to figure out how I can help you out. Be proactive in doing, in finding that work.
Well, one thing you can do along those lines, Cormac, is, and I do this even now, is, if you're in that position where the project manager doesn't have time to kind of direct you or hasn't finished the red lines, ask for a similar project. Say, where's a similar project that is like this, that is done? Show me that. Give me those plans. And then let me see if I can figure out how to do this electrical plan, or, let me, look at the building based upon this other example, and I'll see I'll make some suggestions on where's the best places to cut these sections. You can say yes, no, and then I'll go do those and draw them just like this other project. And you may not get it all right, but at least because if you don't know, at least you have then something to refer to. Hey, this is the way they've done it. This is the way, this is a way to do it. And that way the project manager can sit back and go, okay, yeah, I can go get this done while they figure this other thing out. And here's an example of how it's been done in the past. And they're good, and you're good to go. And I think that really shows some great initiative and enthusiasm for how can I be helpful and productive.
I think just to kind of play a little bit of the opposite side of what you're saying there, Cormac. I've run into a lot of times where people don't ask enough questions, and they make assumptions, or they don't know how to do something, and instead of asking, they'll go Google something, and because they found it on the internet, they assume it's the right way to do it, and they implement, and now we have to go back and redo it because they didn't ask for, like you were just saying, Neil, the way that this firm does things. Right. And that's a frustrating process to go through as well. So there does need to be a really fine balance there.
Well, getting back to the interview part of this, the other thing to ask, and it may be not as relevant. It's going to depend on the position you're going for. If you're somebody out of school, maybe this isn't as relative. If you're somebody with some experience and they're looking for an experienced person. But one of the questions that was told to me was to ask about what is the firm's expectations for the next, number of years, 5 or 10 years, for this, for the position that they're looking for this individual or position that they're looking to hire for. And again, that may not be as relevant in today's economy, because I think a lot of firms are going to say, well, we really don't know, if we're even going to be around in 5 or 10 years. I mean, based upon everything that's been going on, the market's very different now. But hopefully that firm, I think what that question though is trying to go after is does the firm have a plan, a longer term plan of where they want to be and where they want you and what your involvement or that position's involvement is going to be in that 5 to 10 years. And I think what it also tells the firm is that, hey, I'm not seeing this necessarily as a stepping stone where I'm going to jump from one firm to the next firm to the next firm. And, it's like, no, I'm thinking longer term. I'm going to commit a part of my life to this firm. And that's really kind of that question kind of shows a little bit of that as well. So, and firms want to hear that, they don't want to just hire somebody and put a lot of money and effort and time into training them. And then they, 18 months later, they skip to the next firm.
Yeah.
Well, with that, another thing that they should ask, and this is, now we've kind of focused all of the questions that you should be asking your potential employer, but I think that one that's even equally as important is asking them about the work environment, asking them about, how they get involved with the community, asking them how they work on, team building and things like that.
The culture, yeah.
The culture of the firm, because you're not, we spent 8 hours plus, a day there.
I think that's a question you should ask. What's the expectation?
Well,
for hours
and actually,
worked.
that is actually a very important thing to ask, because you are going to have firms, and it's going to probably be every firm out there, that is going to have an expectation that whatever it takes to get the job done, they're going to expect you to do. But and they're going to expect you to sacrifice your time and things like that.
Well, and it depends where you are in your life, right? So if you have a family, maybe you can't hang with that. I have a friend who went to work for a firm, and they didn't have enough work to fill up 50% of his time. He was supposed to be there full time, but they expected him to be there for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. They had an expectation that you would even be there on Saturday. And he's like, but I don't have anything to do. You guys don't have work for me. And they just like smile and nod. Okay, so we'll see you Saturday.
Wow.
But so there are firms like that, and people need to know that there are firms like that. And you don't want to get a job and then find out that the culture is completely different than what you were expecting.
Well, along those lines, there are a couple of questions that I was coached on. Was what's the daily routine of the individual, or the of the individual you're looking to hire? What's that daily routine? How do they move a project through the office? Were both questions that I was coached in to ask. And then also too, another question, and this is something that I think is important depending on what your interests are. But you can ask them what's their philosophy in supporting their employees' involvement in different professional organizations and or events. Some firms are just going to be like, yeah, we're all into that, and we'll pay for you to go to different events, like the AIA conference or something like that. And then some firms are going to be like, yeah, we're just not into that. We don't reimburse our employees, and we don't really support them to do that. And if you have an interest in things like that, or if you don't, it's good to know what that firm's philosophy of support is for that. And also too, getting back to what you guys just said, what is that daily routine? Is there an expectation that you're going to be there 10 hours a day, 6 days a week? Or ask them. And those are great questions, because you want to know those things before you accept the job.
And I think another thing to speak about beyond that is benefits, or things that are above and beyond what your salary is going to be, or your hourly rate. There's firms out there that will pay for your exams if you pass them.
Right.
Maybe you've got every other Friday off. There's all kinds of things that play into how much you get back out of the company that are different than salary, and they can help balance out things like that.
Well, along those lines, another question to ask, because we're starting to talk about salary here, is the question that I was coached to ask was, what are you prepared to do for someone that comes in here and meets or exceeds the expectations that they have? And that's a kind of a way to get to basically asking, what kind of salary are you looking at offering for this type of position? It's a way to talk about it with that, or bring it up, at least without mentioning the word. So they're going to likely do one of two things. They're either going to say, well, we're looking at, in this salary range based on experience, or they're just going to completely blow it off, or they're going to come back to you and say, well, what do you expect? And I've got something here that I think it worked really well for me when I did it. As I said, I was coached really well for this interview, and I was meeting with a very serious A-type personality, and the interview was going very well. And so at this point, for this particular interview a number of years ago, I had all my drawings, and examples of work laid out on the table. And the recruiter coached me to basically, once that question came back to me, it's like, well, what are you expecting? Instead of throwing out a number, which, could either torpedo your entire interview or they'll be like, yeah, we're going to get this guy for a steal, or person for a steal, is that he coached me to have me take my hand, lay it on top of the drawings that are sitting there on the desk, and basically say, based on my proven track record and abilities, I'm sure you will make me a fair and equitable offer. And you just leave it like that. And that way you're not throwing out a number to them where, now they've got something to work with. It's like, no, you're going to throw the ball right back in their court. You put your hand on your drawing and say, look, this is what I can do. So make me the fair and equitable offer. And I thought that was just brilliant. And it worked really well for me when I did do it. And, so I'm going to throw that out there for people as a recommendation to, give that a shot and let us know how it works for you.
And you should also ask about bonus potential. You should ask about vacation. A lot of times, maybe the salary is not negotiable, but a lot of these other things are. Yeah. Especially if you've been in the business for a while. If you're coming back, you're coming in at a higher level, and typical is 2 weeks vacation, you could probably easily negotiate for 3 weeks or higher, and because that's farther out there. That's not an immediate thing, and so it's easier for potential employer to say yes to something like that.
The other thing to consider now, this is for people that have probably been in the workforce for a little while, not so much for the person coming right out of school, but on your resume you're going to have at least the experiences that you've had, and whether or not that's a list of where you've worked over the years. But and I think that this question's a little bit easier to answer because of what's happened in the economy over the last 5 years. But before the economy completely tanked, it was important when, if you had a job and you were there for a year, 2 years, and you bounced to another job and you bounced to another job and you bounced to another job. It's very important to know, or at least have answers for why you left those other firms.
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you? And it may be nothing's wrong with you. You may have perfectly valid reasons, and you need to have those thought out before you go into the interview. I literally took note. I mean, I brought in, a page of notes of my questions that I wanted to ask and some notes to refer to if questions came up. And I did. I referred back to them, and I told them, gave them short, brief, reasonable reasons why I left a firm. And, nowadays, and in fact, I was asked this question at the interview I went to, was like, wow, you seem to bounce around a little bit, right around 2007, 2008, 2009. I had 3 different jobs over that roughly 2 year period. And I, in this case, my answer was very simple. Well, the economy. I mean, I got laid off from one position. I got laid off from another one. And oh, by the way, one firm completely closed. Another firm went from 40 people down to about 6, about 6 or 8 months later. And, so, I mean, it was very easy to answer those questions. The economy devastated the workplaces that I had. And so, or a couple of them that
But you were ready to answer that question.
But I was ready to answer those.
Because, it's a good chance that'll come up.
Absolutely. And that may be less significant, as I said, now, because you can always, kind of default back to the economy. Because even if you were good or are good, you bring a lot of value. A lot of people that were excellent, and firms didn't want to let go, had to let go. Yeah. So that, that's something that is a reflection of what's happened over the last few years. But I think it's good to have that in your back pocket to know why, or maybe they're going to stretch back. Maybe they're, if you've got a longer history of work experience, they may stretch back, before the economy tanked, and look at, where were you, or why did you move around, say from, 2001 to 2007, 2 or 3 times. And you need to have answers for those that seem reasonable, other than, I completely screwed up and they hated me, or, whatever it might have been. So
hopefully it wasn't that.
I completely dropped the ball, and, now I'm going to try and make amends. That's not a good answer.
All right. So let me ask a quick one. What are some of the questions that they asked you without, having to go through detail, but I mean, what are some of the questions that you remember them asking you? So, as a common, so we can. I'd like to throw out. Basically, I'd like to kind of like throw out what are some typical questions in an interview.
Yeah.
To the people who are listening, and
please talk about how you overcame a particular.
Because you're going to be like, please tell us about yourself. And things like that, or, how did you hear about our firm, and, why do you want to, work for us? I mean, so what were some of the questions that they asked you? Yeah,
in this case, I didn't get those types of questions because they sought me out, and so I didn't have to answer those, and I wasn't even asked.
So they really asked, like, okay, so if we hire you, will you wear pants to the office?
No, actually,
obsession with the pants.
I don't know what it is. Because
he's always talking about. Because he's made comment before about not wearing pants.
Yes, it's advantage of working sometimes on your own in your own office. It can be a short stay. I was asked some very bizarre questions, actually, to be honest with you. One of them,
zebras.
No, I was asked. What was it? Do you know how to measure a house? And I just thought that was a strange question because several of the projects I was showing them, or, 2 of the 3 were remodel. The firm that I was interviewing with mainly does remodels and additions, with some, maybe 2 or 3 new houses a year. And that's most of the bulk of their work. So the work I was showing them was some remodels and additions that I had done over the last 4 or 5 years.
Are you kidding? I measure houses for fun.
And
I measure houses in my sleep.
I thought that was kind of an odd question because I'm showing them projects that I had to go measure and draw up. And so I thought that was kind of strange. My one comment.
Have you been paying attention?
Yeah. I kind of wanted to go there, but I thought I'd be polite. I did make mention that the best investment I made was the $100 I spent for a laser to measure, and of course that got an immediate response of, I still use a tape measure. I don't need that fancy, laser stuff. It's like, okay. I guess I'm not
getting... Did you ask him, does he find it hard to measure with his walker?
No, I kind of seriously was interested in the job, but so I didn't want to go quite that far. But, I was asked that question. I was asked about my ability to draw, and which actually worked out really well because I was at a part in my presentation where I flipped on the iPad to basically photos of sketches of schematic design and bubble layouts, and how I took, those bubble diagrams and kind of morphed them into pencil line, drawings of the houses, which eventually morphed into, the actual construction or, final design drawings. And so it was like, I'm old school. I can actually draw. I can actually sketch, and I showed them those things. So, because they're real big on that at this firm. So, so I wasn't really asked a lot of the kind of standard questions that one might expect. Now, granted, too, I'm also not a kid out of college, and so I'm probably not going to be asked some of those basic philosophy, tell us about yourself sort of questions. But those do come up, and you should have answers for them. I mean, be prepared to answer that type of stuff. You don't want to be stumbling and bumbling around through your interview. You want to have answers for those.
Yeah, you've got to just be comfortable talking about yourself. And for some people, that's really hard, actually.
You know, and that's actually the biggest thing, is feeling comfortable. You know, a lot of people don't go on interviews every day, and so just having, you know, because they're going to want you to talk about you. They're going to want you to feel confident in the responses that you give, and it just doesn't come natural to, you know, everybody.
Yeah.
I know my first few, I probably fumbled all around. It got to the point where, you know, once I was, you know, it had advanced in my career and all that other stuff, that I had things to talk about.
Right. Right.
You know, so, you know, do a little bit of research. I mean, there's tons of, you know, things that you can Google to find out what kind of typical questions would be asked, and kind of practice them. Look at them, you know, kind of what are the typical questions asked at an interview, and they're going to give you a list, and, you know, go through them, you know, just kind of practice, because
say them out loud.
Say it. Yes. I mean, one of the things we had to do here in California is take the supplemental exam, which until 2 years ago or so was an oral exam. And the hardest part of that exam was not, do you know the material, but can you effectively communicate that material to a panel of 3, you know, poker-faced judges on the other side of the table.
It sounds like an interview.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And so what I'd recommend is, you know, like as Cormac just said, you know, Google some typical questions, have some prepared responses, and then practice them out loud, as Evan just said. You know, whether it's, you know, have your spouse ask you, or a friend, or a fellow, you know, coworker, or college friend, or roommate, or something, and sit down across the table, have them ask you those questions. It's going to feel funny. I know it felt funny for me when I practiced my, you know, did the practicing for my oral exam in California to get my license. And it's very strange to have your coworkers sit across the table and say, okay, well, answer this. And you're sitting there going, oh, crap, I don't remember. So it's awkward, but the more you go through that, like anything, the more you practice at it, the sharper and better you'll be at it. And I think that'll help a lot with your confidence once you're in that interview.
Good advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think with that, guys, we're probably at the end of our time here.
Sounds good.
All right. So if you have any questions or comments, please visit the website at archispeakpodcast.com. There you'll find links to our individual Twitter accounts and the Archispeak Podcast Facebook page, not the face page, but the Facebook page, which, by the way, we want to say thank you to those listeners that have actually been posting a few comments. With the last week or so, we've gotten some comments on the Facebook page, so we appreciate that. And you know, there you can join in on our conversation. And then if you have some inspiring or horror story of an interview to share, please call the Archispeak Podcast line at 415-484-8496. And we won't share it on the show if you tell us not to, but it would be fun to do that if you've got something like that. And if you haven't already done so, please leave us a review on iTunes. It really helps get the word out about the show and gets us a little bit higher on that iTunes search list. So we really appreciate those.
Yep, absolutely. And if you don't want to leave a voice message, you'd rather type it all up and take your time, a good place to do that is either in the comments on the website for this episode, which is going to be archispeakpodcast.com/episodes/38. Or if you subscribe to the email show notes, there's a link right in there to add your comments to the page. Or add them to our Facebook page. It'd be fun to hear your interview stories. That'd be very cool.
That would be great. Yeah. So everyone, thank you for listening. Stay subscribed.
All right. Good night.
Until next time.
Good night.
Only outline my body in Tiffany blue. When I died, you can bet I know